Thank you guys for joining back. We are reading Idolatry, Journey Out of Egypt by Josh Muglia. We will continue in chapter 5 for RCC. What does RCC mean? I wanted this to be an enigma up until this point. You see, I want many people reading this book, but many will see a phrase or a name and dismiss everything that I present without hearing anything that I have to say. I veiled some things in the naming of the chapter and sections because I wanted people to have a read of this book in order to learn what it is all about. Yes, it is about idolatry, but what specifically? These are the things I have particularly hidden from the average eye. You see, this chapter in particular could be highly offensive to many, including many relatives of mine who I care very much about. I do not seek to attack or hurt, but only to help and heal. And that is what this whole book is about, really. I want to help as many people as I can find to see the truths hidden away in the swarm of lies in this world. And as I begin to reveal these things, dear reader, I ask that you do not be offended or angry, but that you are lowly of spirit and humble, hearing the matter out before you make up your mind. Well, to reveal this chapter's enigma, RCC stands for the Roman Church. Now, what does everything that we have learned up until this point have to do with the RCC? What does it have to do with modern-day Christian church? Sadly, the answer, dear reader, is everything. It has everything to do with it. And in the next chapters, we will see exactly how the RCC affects modern Christianity. But for this chapter, we will focus solely on some history and quotes from the RCC. So what is this church? I will return to calling it the RCC for the sake of simplicity. It is one of the single largest religious organizations in the world today. It is a very old institution that has been around for 17 to 1800 years now and has been a prominent force in the world since its inception. It officially began around the year 300 AD. The official birth of the RCC began with a man named Flavius Valerius Aurelius Constantinus Augustus, or as he is commonly referred to as Constantine. And he was an emperor of Rome between 306 and 337 AD. Now, during that time, the Roman Empire was absolutely filled with idolatry. The Roman pantheon, in particular, was particularly accepting of other cultures' gods, and because of this, they ended up with many. Rome carried Romanized forms of gods from many cultures, and they took these gods and gave them new names. Zeus became Jupiter, and Hera became Juno. Aphrodite became Venus. Artemis became Diana. Hermes became Mercury, and Dionysus became Bacchus, and so on and so forth. Although, interestingly, Apollo kept his name. Another note is that at this time, there was a dramatic rise of a cult that followed the god Mithra. Please keep this in mind. Mithra was becoming mingled with faith in Christ, and the gospel was becoming perverted, thanks to the effort of some wicked men, but we will look at that more in a while. The story goes that Emperor Constantine was preparing for a large battle for the Milvian bridge against his relative Maxentius. Now, Maxentius proved to be the one real threat to Constantine's rule over Rome, and so he was troubled about the coming battle. Before the battle, Constantine saw a divine vision. Eusebius recorded this vision for us. He saw with his own eye the trophy of the cross the cross of light in heaven, above the sun, bearing the inscription, "Conquer by this." He then put the symbol on the shields of his army, and though greatly outnumbered, they managed to drive back the armies of Maxentius. Thankful for the divine intervention, Constantine, with the authority as emperor, declared the Christian God to be the one true God and legally instituted the RCC, forcing everybody to convert to Christianity. Now, this story is all well and good, but unfortunately, this is the high point of the tale, and it goes rather downhill from there. The Romans, as I stated earlier, were completely taken with paganism, and their pantheon of gods played its part in nearly every one of their activities, from their days of the week, months of the year, festivals, architecture, sports, you name it, it was associated with their gods. Even the famous red capes and plumed helmets associated with Roman soldiers was to honor Mars, their god of war, who had an official color of red. Now, supposedly, when Constantine was faced with the reality that he was trying to enforce Christianity in an entirely pagan culture, he decided it would be better to repaint rather than to replace. So he took the pagan Roman pantheon and adopted it as a part of his new church. In fact, as an interesting side note, Catholic literally means all-embracing, and that's just what it did. It embraced all of the pagan gods that Rome was already worshiping, and it gave them a new paint job. This is a quote taken from the website called Catholic Straight Answers, which is a website that is by Catholics for Catholics to offer answers for their religion. This quote can be found in a few other places as well and is easily verifiable information. In 609, Emperor Phocas gave the pantheon in Rome to Pope Boniface IV, who rededicated it on May 13th under the title Saint Maria and the Martyrs, or Saint Mary and all Martyrs. So Emperor Phocas gave the Roman pantheon of false gods to Pope Boniface IV in the year 609, and the Pope rededicated it as the Saint Mary and Martyrs. So what does this mean? It means that the RCC officially accepted all the pagan gods that the Romans held as their own and renamed the gods according to the names of Mary and various martyrs or saints. Speaking of these saints, very recently, a man named John Henry Newman was officially canonized as a saint. And in 1845, he wrote a paper entitled Essay on the Development of Christian Doctrine. This is an excerpt from it. We are told in various ways by Eusebius that Constantine, in order to recommend the new religion to the heathen, transferred into it the outward ornaments which they had been accustomed in their own. It is not necessary to go into a subject which the diligence of the Protestant writers has made familiar to most of us. The use of temples and these dedicated to particular saints and ornamented on occasions with branches of trees, incense, lamps, and candles, votive offerings on recovery from illness, holy water, asylums, holy days and seasons, use of calendars, processions, blessings on the field, sacerdotal vestments, the tonsure, the ring in marriage, turning to the east, images at a latter date, perhaps the ecclesiastical chant, and the Kyrie eleison are of all pagan origin, and they are sanctified by their adoption into the church. So this Catholic saint clearly acknowledges that a large portion of the practices in Catholicism are actually pagan in origin because Constantine had to get the heathen to accept Christianity. The RCC took these practices and sanctified them somehow, making them acceptable for followers of God to participate in. This is in direct opposition to what God commanded. In Deuteronomy 12:3-4, you shall utterly destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, burn their wooden images with fire. You shall cut down the carved images of their gods and destroy their names from that place. You shall not worship the Lord your God with such things. And in fact, this portion specifically mentions sacred pillars. This is a direct reference to the obelisk I mentioned in previous chapters that represents the phallic organ of Osiris. And if you go to the Vatican right now, you will find two obelisks. The first one is smack in the middle of St. Peter's Square and is actually one of the original obelisks from Egypt that stood in one of their pagan temples. This is an excerpt from the website called stpetersbasilica.info. The obelisk from Egypt was brought to Rome by Emperor Caligula in 37 AD, and it originally stood in his circus on a spot to the south of the basilica, close to the present sacristy. Sixtus V had Domenico Fontana move it in 1586 to the center of St. Peter's Square. It is also a sundial, and its shadows mark noon over the signs of the zodiac in the white marble discs in the paving of the square. The obelisk rests on 4 couchant lions, each with 2 bodies whose tails intertwine. Obelisk is from obeliscus, in the shape of a spear. And for pagans, the obelisk was a solar symbol that represented a vital flow between heaven and earth, a way of communicating to the divine. As a pagan monument in the greatest Christian square, it is a symbol of humanity, reaching out to Christ. Originally inscribed to Divine Augustus and Divine Tiberius, and now dedicated to the Holy Cross, Christus Vincit, Christus Regnat, and Christus Imperit. Christus ab omni malo plebum suum defendant, and it is topped with a bronze cross containing a fragment of the true cross. So this particular obelisk was actually brought straight over from Egypt, and it stood in the circus of Emperor Caligula, which is also the circus of Nero. Now, if you don't know who Caligula was or what his circus was like, you should know that Caligula was one of the most vicious and evil emperors to ever live. He severely persecuted followers of Christ in the most twisted and awful ways. His so-called circus was one of the places that he would torment and execute them for the masses. Caligula was known for his cruelty, sadism, sexual perversion, and general insanity. And based upon his tastes, you can imagine what kind of acts went on around this particular obelisk. It is interesting that this pagan phallic symbol, directly from Egypt, pleased a man so debased and wicked that he spent a great amount of money to have it transferred to his circus as a decoration. And so the Catholic Church decided to take this pagan phallic symbol and sit it right in the middle that sat in the middle of Egyptian temples, and then belonged to one of the most evil and insane men who ever ruled Rome, and stuck it right as the center of their most prominent and grand square, the capital of their church. The other obelisk you will find in Vatican City is the Lateran Obelisk, which is the largest obelisk in the world today. Sadly, this is only the beginning of objects associated with idolatry in the Vatican Museum alone. They have statues of Aulus, Apollo, Artemis, Athena, Eros, Fortuna, Hera, Ariad, I don't know her name, Mercury, Diana, and many other pagan gods and goddesses. In Deuteronomy 12:3, you should destroy their altars and break their sacred pillars and burn their wooden images with fire. You should cut down their images of their gods and destroy their names from this place. This is to say nothing on their paintings and works of art that are contained therein. And if you look at nearly every single painting that has come from the RCC sources, the martyrs, apostles, Mary, Joseph, and Christ, all of them are displayed with this halo behind their heads. And this is not something new that they thought up. The halo is actually a term that pertains directly to the sun. More often than not, these halos appear as the sun itself. And in fact, you can find the imagery of the sun shining behind the heads of the gods and art from pagan cultures all over the world. So why would the Catholic Church depict these biblical persons and saints in the same way that the pagans were depicting their pagan gods? Well, because they adopted their pagan gods and repainted them. And if you look nearly at all of their paintings, you will also notice a particular hand sign that has the pointer and middle finger pointed upward and the ring and pinky fingers pointing downward. This particular hand sign is seen all over these pagan statues and paintings, and it is seen in nearly every single statue of the Baphomet. The Baphomet, by the way, is nearly every single statue that either has a disc or circle behind its head, or a flame above it, or both. This is an excerpt from the BBC website regarding the hand sign that the Baphomet makes. 2 fingers on the right hand pointing up, and 2 on the left hand pointing down, meaning as above, so below. And these words and the accompanying gestures that are familiar to occultists are drawn from the ancient works of Hermes Trismegistus, whose writings became popular during the Renaissance and Reformation. The phrase is also used in relation to science and the universe and God. But Levi wrote that by making this gesture, his Baphomet expresses the perfect harmony of mercy with justice. So if you take a moment and search as above, so below hand signs and look at the images, you will find this hand sign all over. After that, search Catholic paintings of Jesus and look at his hand signs. The Rosary is a necklace made specifically of a number of beads that pertain to certain prayers that you are supposed to say in a certain order. The Buddhists, Hindus, and Muslims have this exact practice, and each of their religions also. And the Pope carries with him a crossier, which is an item from the days of Egypt that the Pharaoh used to carry as a symbol of authority of the god of Osiris. And they are supposed to eat fish on Fridays, and it just so happens that Friday was the day Romans worshipped Cilicia, the fish goddess. They would eat fish in honor of her. There are different patron saints for every different aspect of life, just as there are patron gods in paganism. And Mary is often depicted with the moon under her feet, having the stars behind her head, and is commonly called Mary, Queen of Heaven, matching Diana's title and image perfectly. Offering flowers and burning incense to statues of Mary are common occurrences among these Catholics. Offering incense to the Queen of Heaven is nothing new. In Jeremiah 44, it states, "As for the word that you have spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we will not listen to you, but we will certainly do whatever has gone out of our own mouth, to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings to her as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings and our princes, in the city of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem." For then we had plenty of food, were well off, and saw no trouble. But since we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have lacked everything and we have been consumed by the sword and famine." And the women also said, "When we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings to her, we did make cakes for her to worship her and pour out drink offerings to her without our husband's permission." So Jeremiah spoke to the people, the men and women, and all the people who had given him that answer, saying, "The incense that you burned in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem, you and your fathers and the kings and your princes and the people of the land, did not the Lord remember them, and did it not come into his mind? So the Lord could no longer bear it because of the evil of your doings and because of the abominations which you committed. Therefore your land is desolate, and astonishment, a curse, and without an inhabitant, as it is to this day, because you have burned incense and because you have sinned against the Lord, and have not obeyed the voice of the Lord, or walked in his law, in his statutes, or in his testimonies. Therefore this calamity has happened to you, as at this day." Catholics claim that the practice of calling Mary Queen of Heaven and burning incense to her and venerating her are not pagan because Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, was referred to as the Queen Mother and enjoyed a prominent place in Solomon's court. What they fail to remember is that Solomon's heart was turned away to idolatry by his wives and adopted their pagan practices, and built temples to this Queen of Heaven, Ashtoreth, and was severely judged for it. Funny that in the very place that they claim that they have biblical foundation for this place, you see an example of the Queen Mother having an important position in the palace of a man who turned away his heart from God and ran after Ashtoreth. And you never find any examples of people worshiping or offering incense, cakes, and other things to the Queen Mother. The only biblical foundation that you will find for burning incense to the Queen of Heaven is in Jeremiah, where God says, or where God destroys a people for it. And the garb of the Catholic priests that they use is directly pagan in origin. In order to attach to Christianity great attraction in the eyes of the nobility, the priests adopted the outer garments and adornments which were used in pagan cults. The life of Constantine, Eusebius, cited in Altai Nimaleia, page 94. It goes on, and if you just begin to look at the statues, paintings, and symbology in the Roman Catholic Church, specifically the Vatican, and you compare it to the pagan symbology, you will find more similarities than you can shake a stick at it. Now, how is this answered by this church? Well, it's really simple. The Pope, who is known as the Vicar of Christ, or the Replacement Christ, is venerated as the physical representation of Christ on earth. And according to this church, the Pope carries all the same authority on the earth as if he was Christ himself. In fact, the Pope is actually equal with God himself, according to that church. To believe that our Lord God the Pope has not the power to decree as he is decreed is to be deemed heretical. The Pope and God are the same, so he has all the power in heaven and earth. And this is by Pope Pius V, and the previous one was Pope John the 22nd. Hence, the Pope is crowned with a triple crown, as King of Heaven and of earth and of the lower regions. Not only that, but the Pope now has the same responsibilities and honors as Christ himself. This is our last lesson to you. Receive it and engrave it in your minds, all of you. By God's commandment, salvation is to be found nowhere but the church. The strong and effective instrument of salvation is none other than the Roman pontificate. This is by Pope Leo XIII. The Savior himself is the door of the sheepfold. I am the door to the sheep. into this fold of Jesus Christ, and no man may enter unless he is led by the sovereign pontiff, and only if they are united to him can men be saved. For the Roman pontiff is the vicar of Christ and his personal representative on the earth. This is by Pope John the 23rd. So the leaders of this Roman church that encompass elements of nearly every single religion is the replacement for Christ here on this earth. Only he can offer salvation or forgive sins and has absolute, unquestionable authority. Under his authority, idolatry is not such a big deal now. And in fact, they rewrote the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord your God, and you shall not have any strange gods before me. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain, and remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. And you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not covet your neighbor's good. Do you notice something missing here? Exodus 20, 4-6. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. This was the 2nd commandment given right after, you shall have no other gods before me. But I guess all of the idolatry that God absolutely hated and severely judged in the Old Testament is no big deal now, because the replacement, the vicar of Christ, said it's okay to have idols now. Speaking of idols, it would seem that Mary has taken over some interesting responsibilities as well. The foundation of all of our confidence is found in the Blessed Virgin Mary. God has committed to her the treasury of all good things, in order that everyone may know that through her are obtained every hope, every grace, and all salvation. For this is his will, that we obtain everything through Mary, said by Pope Pius IX. And in fact, by being assumed into heaven, she has not laid aside the office of salvation, but the manifold intercession she continues to obtain for us, the grace of eternal salvation. Yeah, this is what the Catholic Church says. So this is by John Paul II in 1980. But hey, why not? Apparently, Mary was every bit as perfect as Christ. And I found this quote in the page of an old catechism that my grandma had from years ago. I cannot seem to find this exact quote, but I have the picture to prove that it was in her catechism. Who was born without original sin? Blessed Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, was conceived and born and lived and died without any stain of sin. So, according to the Roman Catholic Church, Mary was also immaculately conceived herself by her mother, Saint Anne, who, in spite of not one single prophecy or mention in the entire Bible stating that there would be any immaculate conception except for Christ, further, despite the Bible blatantly stating that Jesus had physical brothers multiple times, they claim that she was a virgin from her birth until her death. In other words, Catholicism claims she was every bit as perfect and sinless as Christ. So no wonder that they claim that they can receive salvation from her. So I guess Christ can take a load off. After all, between the Pope and Mary, they've pretty much got everything covered. The Pope and his priests can forgive sins whether God likes it or not. God himself is obliged to abide by the judgment of his priest, and either not to pardon or to pardon, according as they refuse to give absolution, provided the penitent is capable of it. This judicial authority will even include the power to forgive sin. The Catholic Encyclopedia, article under the Pope on 265. The Pope can rewrite the Bible however he sees fit and issue laws. The Pope is of great authority and power that he can modify, explain, or interpret even divine laws. The Pope can modify laws since his power is not of man, but of God, and he acts as vice-regent of God upon the earth. And the belief of the Bible as the sole source of faith is unhistorical, illogical, fatal to the virtue of faith, and destructive of unity. The Catholic Encyclopedia, Volume 13. So I guess for salvation, forgiveness of sins, instructions how to live, and anything else that we can think of, we have the Pope to direct us. In fact, we don't even need the Bible anymore. We can just throw it out and listen to the Pope. After all, to base your theology off of the Bible is apparently unhistorical and illogical and destructive to the faith and unity. I hope that you are seeing what I am seeing, dear reader. The Catholic Church has changed times, and with the advent of the Gregorian calendar, which we will look at in a bit, that was instituted by Pope Gregory XIII, they have changed laws. They have replaced Christ completely. They have embraced all things pagan, and in the world today are actively setting up temples or houses of worship that function for Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, and many others. Very recently, the Vatican hosted the Amazonian Synod, where there are multiple pictures and video footage of natives and guests from the Vatican bowing down to a bare-breasted pregnant fertility goddess idol in a big circle. And Pope Francis even blessed this idol through the Vatican, though the Vatican has tried to deny it. In spite of the myriad of physical evidence and eyewitnesses. Another massive and deep study in and of itself is this. Nearly every single government in the world today is controlled by the members of a secret society known as the Freemasons, and it goes beyond the Freemasons. They are literally the Jesuits. This whole one world kingdom global agenda is being directly engineered by members of this cult that goes by many names at the highest level. And Freemasonry is actually just a branch off of a much older group known as the Jesuits. The Jesuits, contrary to what is commonly taught, was a hidden arm of the Roman Catholic Church. And in fact, Pope Francis, who currently sits at the Vatican, is a Jesuit himself. This is an excerpt from the extreme oath and induction of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. I do further promise and declare that I will have no opinion or will of my own, but will unhesitatingly obey each and every command that I may receive from my superiors in the militia of the Pope. I will wage a relentless war, secretly and openly, against all heretics. I will spare neither age or sex. I will rip up the stomachs and wombs of their women. I will crush their infants' heads against the walls in order to annihilate their execrable race. I will secretly use the poisonous cup, the strangulation cord, either in public or private, as I at any time may be directed to do so by any agents of the Pope or superior of the Brotherhood of the Holy Father of the Society of Jesus. Look this stuff up for yourself. I could not make it up even if I wanted to. Search everything that I have presented to you on the account of the RCC and see the quotes, imagery, activities, and assertions are not accurate. All of this ends up leading to a very simple conclusion, that they are one of the most blasphemous and idolatrous organizations to ever exist in the world. Now, I need to make a mention that I do not hate the Catholic people at all. There are many people who I care about very much, relatives, coworkers, and friends who are still stuck in Catholicism. They have no idea what is the true nature of the RCC. They were raised in it. They have been told just what they needed to hear to be fooled into thinking it was something good. And I know many Catholics with the best of intentions who genuinely want to walk with God. And this is not an attack on the people, but to expose the church leaders that has pulled the wool over the eyes of their people. Again, my heart is not to attack anyone, but to merely warn, to heal, and to help. If someone that you loved was in a burning building, would you not want to try to pull them out? Ultimately, I cannot pull anyone from this building set on fire by hell, but I can call out to those to come out of it. And if you are a Catholic, the biggest piece of advice I can give you is the same advice that I would give to anyone. Humble yourself and seek out the truth. Question, test, reason, research. Find the truth at any cost and walk in it. Now, we aren't even really halfway through the book, and many of you are probably asking what all this has to do with you. And my general demographic of the people I want to get in this book was primarily Christians and outside of the Catholic Church. Most Christians are not part of the RCC. Most Christians or Protestants I talk to already know a little bit about the RCC and understand that it is not wise to be a part of it. So why am I talking about this church, and what does it have to do with Protestants? Keep reading and find out. All roads, chapter 6. Baptist, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, Pentecostal, non-denominational, all of these and thousands more, represent different denominations within Christianity. And each of these and others have different doctrines and different authority structures. And they differ on many things. Some believe in spiritual gifts and some do not. Some hail from specific teachers and some do not. Within Christianity, there is a vast spectrum of belief. And in spite of these differences, there are actually many similarities when looking between the different denominations. This is because the vast majority of modern Christianity sprouted from the same three sources: Protestants, Separatists, and Reformationists. And these three groups comprise the foundation for nearly all the denominations together, with a few exceptions. So what does this have to do with Catholicism? To understand, we need to back up quite a far ways. Constantine established to the RCC around 300 BC. The years ensuing saw the rise of the Roman Catholic Church and the stamping out of any sort of follower of Christ who was not willing to come under their banner. True Christianity was essentially swallowed up completely within a few hundred years as the RCC grew exponentially, thanks to their willingness to adopt paganism and the military strength of Rome. Eventually, however, we know that Rome fell, and this period of time thereafter was known as the Dark Ages, and generally referring to this period between 500 and 1500 AD. In the midst of the space of time arose the Holy Roman Empire, which became a great kingdom in the earth. The official beginning of this empire was 800 AD, and it lasted to 1806 AD. In the early years of the Roman Empire Church, nearly every nation was beholden to the Roman Catholic Church. Cardinals and popes were given authority often equal to kings. And in the years prior to this period, as I stated earlier, the church had just about stamped out all signs of Christianity besides its own personal brand of it. And this totalitarian control continued in the Holy Roman Empire. And during this time, a huge amount of Bibles were confiscated and burned, and anybody caught reading a Bible was killed. The RCC translated the Bible into Latin, which became the official language that was used by the church and continues to be so until this day. And the reason for the shift in language was because Latin was a dead language by around the year 600 AD. By translating the Bible into a dead language of Latin, it destroyed any Bible, and destroying any Bible that wasn't in Latin, they ended up essentially preventing anybody from reading the Bible for themselves. And during this time, the people were wholly dependent on the church to teach them the scriptures. Well, as always, as time went on, they began to lose their grasp on total scriptural control, and the Bibles began to resurface in other languages. And in the years leading up to 1500s, there was a massive return of Bibles as people began to find and translate Bibles for themselves. People were once again able to read the scriptures for themselves. And this spelled trouble for the church, however, because people began to realize what they were doing and was not at all what Scripture taught. Men began to form together in order to share the truth, and they called the people out of Catholicism between 1400 and 1650 AD. Leaders began to arise and groups to form and operate, with three in particular becoming prominent. The names of each of these reveal at a glance what they are about. We have the Protestants who protested against the church, and we have the separatists who decided to separate from the church, and we have the Reformationists who decided to try to reform it. And it was during this general period when men like Calvin and Luther and Wycliffe and Tyndale and others began to arise. And these men began teaching truth. And God used them in a mighty way to kickstart the church as a separate and independent entity from the mother church. This event is known as the Protestant Reformation, formed around the foundation for modern Christianity. Now, these men were great men, and God did use them in a mighty way, but I want to remind you that they were merely men, and men are fallible and make mistakes. Men cannot really understand everything pertinent to the world around them because there is far too much information for even the most intelligent brain to hold. These men had a tremendous influence and effect on the church, and I do not want to diminish anything that they did, as I believe that they did exactly as they were directed to do. I would suggest, however, that while they broke free of much of the influence of the church, they did not break free from all of it. And there is an old saying that you can take the animal out of the wild, but you cannot take the wild out of the animal. Much the same way, though these men walked out of the Roman Catholicism, they still carried with them Catholic elements that they didn't even realize that they still carried with them that were Catholic. And the old saying goes, all roads lead to Rome. The same idea is present within modern Christian dominations. And the rest of the section goes through and examines some of these practices. Now, we already saw in previous chapters that God hates idolatry and does not want to be worshipped in manner that is pagan. We also saw that paganism hails back directly to Satan. And we know and we understand that paganism is not something that we should have in our lives at all. And yet, as you will see, there is an alarming amount of paganism still in Christianity today, hiding in plain sight. And some of these things will be easy to let go of and put out of our lives, and others, such as the next chapter, I'm still not sure what to do with. Nonetheless, I will begin to expose for you the idolatry likely hiding in your own life in order to help you purify yourself as the day of Christ's return approaches. Thank you for joining me for chapters 5 and 6 of the book Idolatry, Journey Out of Egypt by Josh Muglia. I will end this recording and start back up another live to continue in the next chapter or two.